Hi, I'm Dan Kubisky with the Society of Professional Journalists, Washington, D.C. chapter. This week, we learned that former President Jimmy Carter died at the age of 100. There have been and will continue to be many reviews of his term in office, his accomplishments, and his failures. One item comes through quite strongly is the importance religion played in his life. And while this factor has been mentioned in all the discussions of Carter's life, in many cases it has not been looked at with the unique perspective brought by journalist and longtime SPJ member Christi Harlan. Christi is a writer and communications consultant in Washington. She has a 20-year journalism career with the Wall Street Journal, the Dallas Morning News, and the Austin American-Statesman. She has also worked for the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. In August 1993, Christi joined the First Baptist Church at the city of Washington, D.C. This is the same church attended by Carter during his presidency. Christi's journalism skills were suited to years of service as church clerk and volunteer communication director. And those skills, and dare we call it accident of where to worship, led to Christi's book. Christi, thank you very much for being here, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Dan.
So while he was president, Jimmy Carter taught Sunday school at the First Baptist Church. And you've collected his lessons into a book, Mr. Carter, the Class is Yours. So what led you to put this book together?
Well, as you mentioned, Dan, I've been a member of the First Baptist Church of the city of Washington, D.C., almost from the start of my journalism career in Washington. I moved here from Dallas with the Wall Street Journal to cover the Securities and Exchange Commission, and 10 years later found myself public affairs director for the Securities and Exchange Commission. But I knew in the back of my mind that Carter had attended, maybe taught at First Baptist. And when he went into hospice care in February of 2023, I got into the church archives because I thought we had a story to share with reporters. And Dan, I found a scoop. Not only had he taught Sunday school at First Baptist during his presidency at least 17 times, we had 14 recordings of him teaching. A professional sound engineer and a volunteer engineer who was actually an economist with the Federal Reserve taped Jimmy Carter's Sunday school lessons, starting on reel-to-reel, the big old tapes. Then eventually the church transferred those to cassette tapes, then to CDs. And I found the 14 CDs of his lessons and started sharing them with news organizations. This was too good to keep inside the church. Everybody seemed to know that he had taught Sunday school at Plains Baptist Church in Georgia before he was president. And after his presidency, he taught at Maranatha Baptist Church, also in Plains, Georgia. But I found that very few people knew, including the public affairs director for the Carter Library and Museum, very few people knew that he actually taught while he was president. So I was grateful to C-SPAN, to CNN, other news outlets shared some of the recordings. But as I stayed in the church archives, I found more. We actually have the little blue membership application cards that Jimmy Carter, Rosalind Carter, his son Chip Carter filled out when they stepped forward to join the church exactly 3 days after his inauguration. We also have the little blue card that Amy Carter filled out requesting to be baptized. The Baptists, who your listeners may not know, Baptists do not baptize children when they're infants. Mm-hmm. We expect that they have an understanding of what a relationship with Jesus Christ means to them and to their lives. And so it's typical. Amy was 9 when she was baptized in front of an intimate crowd of about 1,000 people at First Baptist. And as I found these artifacts, oh, one other thing about joining a Baptist church, we don't let just anybody in. You have to be vetted by the membership committee. And even for the President of the United States, you have to get a letter of recommendation from your prior church. And we have a little white card from Plains Baptist Church attesting to the good character of President Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter. At that point, my reporter instincts kicked in, and I decided to quit giving away the story. I decided I had a story to tell about my church, about our former member, our former teacher. So I digitized the CDs of the recordings, and that's the transcripts are in Mr. President, the class is yours. And then because there was so much other material, one example, an usher in the 1970s, while the Carters were there, kept a personal diary. And at the request of a previous church historian, he gathered all of the pieces of the diary that referred to the Carters. One example, one Sunday morning, young Amy, in the middle of a church service, starts wiggling a tooth and pulls it out in the middle of church, crawls over 3 people to hand it to her daddy, the President of the United States, who examines it, as any father would, and then, of course, hands it to his wife, Rosalind, who puts it in her purse. That was all in the usher's diary. And so I had more material than the Sunday school lessons. So a second book, Normal Lives, President Jimmy Carter in his church. And it refers to, the title refers to a quote that Carter gave at the Sunday school class banquet in October 1977. And if I might, I'll read it from the back of the book because his words are better than mine. You have made our lives normal lives. You have given us stability in a position that is inherently sometimes unstable. A president of our country can be an isolated person. You have taken us in, and we are indebted to you. That illustrates how much the First Baptist Church meant to him during his presidency, which many of the obituaries and reports on his life record terrible stuff happened during President Carter's one term in office. Love Canal collapsed, the first big environmental disaster. 3 Mile Island nearly melted down. There was a blackout in New York City that led to 2 days of riots and looting. Mount St. Helens exploded. And of course, as everyone knows, his presidency ended with the hostages being held in the embassy in Tehran. The most important thing I learned listening to his lessons and producing these books, he managed to set all of that aside when he came to church. You mentioned in the introduction how important his religion was to him. Church was church. His day job was his day job, and he managed to set that aside on at least 75 Sundays when he and his family were in the pews at First Baptist Church.
Wow. Wow. That is an interesting, again, an interesting perspective that I don't think a lot of people will know, because you had, the church process is a much more intimate process than the presidency. So in doing this book and then the follow-up, did you have the cooperation of the Carter family, or was it even needed? And have you heard anything from them about the books?
Well, I'm going to get reporter demerits for this, Dan. One, because he was in hospice care, and I've had family members, my mother, her mother, in hospice. I did not reach out for comment. I reached out to the Carter Center and the Carter Library and confirmed that the church is the owner of the recordings and that we had permission to both transcribe and share those with the broader audience. I have not heard anything since then, but I also know from my 20 years in public affairs that followed 20 years in journalism, it's been a really busy 2 years for the members of the family, the leadership at the Carter Center and at the Carter Library. So I just kind of did my thing.
Okay. Putting on not just your journalism hat, but your analytical hat as well. What do you think we can learn from the late president, from what you were put together in your two books, that we're not going to hear from all the people who will be talking about him over the next week or 2 weeks as we move toward his lying in state in Washington and then ultimate internment?
I think, again, that it goes back to his ability to have faith in one place and his day job in the other place. What I'm really hoping comes across to people from especially the second book, Jimmy Carter had a wicked good sense of humor. That man was funny. And he had a very good relationship with the regular teacher of the Sunday school class. And they had a shtick going. For example, I refer to their back and forth about the book of Revelation as Abbott and Costello do Revelation. They were insult comics. The regular teacher was an insurance executive, and he would regularly insult the president of the United States for being an inadequate Bible teacher. It was all in good fun, but it's Jimmy Carter's sense of humor, I think, doesn't get quite enough attention.
Now, you've mentioned it a few times. I mentioned it as well. He was unabashedly religious, and it was an important part of his life. And yet, during his entire public career, he was criticized by evangelicals, in many cases, for not being Christian enough. Have you learned anything at all in what you saw in putting these books together that might answer those critics?
I think Carter's post-presidency life is evidence that he was doing exactly what Jesus told us to do, which was to follow Jesus's example. Care for the poor, care for the strangers, the immigrants among us, take care of the sick. I think Jimmy Carter's post-presidency life is plenty of evidence to offset those critics.
These are documents and teachings that Carter did 40 years ago. Are there lessons today that we could take from what you've discovered in your research that we can, you know, are there lessons we can draw on today to help us get through what is a very tense time in the American society?
I think I would go to the lesson he taught 1 week after he achieved the Camp David Peace Accords. Yeah, the Usher's diary on September 17th, 1978 contains an entry that says, President Carter was to teach class today, but called to say he was still busy at Camp David. Pardon me. 1 week later, Carter made up for missing the class. And it was one of the very few times that he mentioned anything that was going on in his presidency. And he, of course, starts with a funny line. Well, it's always great to be back from a 2-week vacation at Camp David. And the class laughs. And then he says, the last 2 weeks have seen some of the worst moments of my life and some of the best. Said for a while, it looked like the only thing we agreed on, a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian, was that we worshiped the same God. And the fact that he focused on what they had in common as they worked out this peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, I think that's a good lesson for all of us. Look at what we have in common.
Is there anything else you'd like to add as we wind up this time together?
Just that this was a remarkable circumstance. I think I was in the right place at the right time at First Baptist. And I'm just enormously grateful for the opportunity to essentially get a piece of history out of the church archives and to do what I was trained to do as a reporter, share it with the public.
Well, I was going to say a lot of our profession in journalism is right place at right time, but it's also recognizing that you're at that point. And it is an interesting. I have not read your second book yet, but I've been going through your first one, and it is a very interesting read and gives me a whole new perspective on the late president. The book is available. It's Mr. President, the class is yours. It is available at ChristiHarlanWriter.com and at Amazon.com. Christi, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your service as a journalist, and thank you for your service to the SPJ for so many years. You were one of the first people I met when I joined the SPJ in Washington, and I will never say how many years ago that was.
Thank you, Dan. I enjoyed it.